Okay, I'm interviewing my father for our oral history project. Please state your full name and if you're named for anybody.
Stephen Bowen McMillan. The Stephen is a common Hungarian name, and Bowen was a friend of the McMillan side of the family in Georgia. My grandparents both came to America from Austria-Hungary. They lived in well, they did not know each other until they met in Detroit. the They both came through and went through Ellis Island
At different times?
at different times. And at Ellis Island, from Ellis Island, both of them had family, but not related, in Detroit. And that's where my grandfather, uh, you know, got into what was in Detroit, and immediately they started to assimilate and have the culture of the American way and not necessarily the Hungarian way.
Okay, so when they came to America, their plan was to stay, not to return, like most Europeans had only wanted to come over here temporarily. They wanted to stay.
Well, this was in the early 1900s, 1900 something. Uh, I can't remember the exact date, but yes, they did come here with the sole purpose of becoming Americans. And uh, when they met, my grandmother's name was Helen Tonkos, and apparently, obviously she met my grandfather, Nicholas Larwith, and they were married.
Now, it wasn't his name not originally Larwith, right? You
His
said.
name originally was not Larwith, it was Larveth, but somewhere along the line, I think it was in Ellis Island, that they changed the V to a W, so it was Larwith, forever.
From then on, yes. Now, I didn't know that they didn't meet in Hungary. I thought they came over here together. So, do you know who came first, Grandma or Grandpa?
My grandfather came first. Uh, my grandfather came first, and then my grandmother to be and her mother came to America maybe a year or two after my grandfather got here.
Okay. Now, when Grandpa Larwith came over here, did he have a job already, or did he have to look for a job, or did he have any special skills?
Well, he has some. I guess he was very good at adapting to whatever he was doing. Uh, he did not have a job, and it was very difficult at that time, and it was just like any other group that came over. They were not, accepted very well by the American people. The American citizens who thought um, they were much better than them. Well, every day my grandfather would go to the Ford Motor Company, and he would sit there and hopefully get a job. Well, one day he was very fortunate that a gentleman by the name of Henry Ford, the original Ford, came by, saw my grandfather, and asked him if he would like a job. Well, my grandfather said, "Yes, sir, I would." And he was hired by Mr. Ford, and his job was painting the old Model A, Model Ts, And it was amazing, though, that they did not paint with a spray gun, and nothing was automatic. He painted with a brush, and his work was so good that he was really had many accolades for his work. The pay was very good for that time. Mr. Ford was very generous. And one thing that was interesting, they were not paid in dollars or checks like we were. Their pay was in gold.
Oh, wow.
Uh, and
Like gold coins or gold
well,
bars or?
gold coins.
Mm-hmm.
And of course that was, he was paid quite good for the time. Probably about, you work 8 hours a day. I think that's all Mr. Ford allowed him to work. But he told me one time that the salary, but it was, for that time, it was remarkable.
All right, and this was in Ohio?
No, this was in Detroit, Michigan.
Detroit, Michigan. And then they moved to DeLand, Florida to...
Well, after my grandparents were married, they moved to Florida with the intentions of opening up a bakery shop. My grandmother and great grandmother were excellent cooks and excellent pastry makers. However, that fell through because one of my grandmother's brothers thought he was getting a bargain on some flour, and come to find out that the flour was no good.
But they were able to do what once they moved to Florida, once that fell through?
Well, at that time, my grandfather bought some property right next to and a house right across the street from where they lived until they died. And my grandfather opened up a paint and body shop and was very successful.
What was the name of it?
It was Nick's Fender and Body.
I remember that. Now, did they practice any traditions from their homeland that you can remember, in the household, since you did live with them or you lived next door to them, correct?
Yes, and spent a lot of time at their house. No, they were not. When they became American, or when they came to America, they became Americans. Although they were Hungarian Americans, and it was very difficult at the time because foreigners were not accepted very well. My grandfather was harassed somewhat, and even to the point of the Ku Klux Klan trying to get him to move.
Mm.
However, a friend that he had met who was a lawyer intervened, and that was ended. There was, and then he just kept working at his paint and body shop.
So do you think if they were living in today's society, do you think they would call themselves Hungarian Americans, or do you think they would just call themselves American?
Knowing my grandfather to the day he died, he said he was proud to be an American.
Okay. Now, something a little different. Was there any kind of religion that was practiced in the home? I know that Grandma Laura was Catholic, and that your mom was Catholic. But was religion a big deal to carry on that, Catholic religion, or did they assimilate into an American type religion, or?
No, they remained Roman Catholics. Uh, and a story, uh, there was a very, very small church, but my grandmother and several other ladies would have knitting parties, and they would raise money and donate it to the church,
The Catholic Church.
the Catholic Church.
Mhm.
And eventually the Catholic Church built a bigger church, and now they've got a huge church and a school. And what's really upsetting to me is that when my grandmother passed away, the Catholic priest came over there, and it was just like, uh, he had no idea how much grandma Larworth, loved and helped the Catholic Church.
Okay. Let me see. Did they ever get a chance to go back to Hungary to visit?
Yes, they did. When I was stationed in Germany, uh, and they flew over, and they went in to Czechoslovakia, Romania, Hungary, Austria. Of course, I could go to Austria, but they went to Austria, and then they went to Hungary, and to all those states, and then they went back to where, where they lived. And,
But they had no desire to stay.
oh no, they had no desire to stay, but my grandfather was very impressed uh, with Germany. Uh, Now, there's one thing I want to add, that them being Hungarian, Austro-Hungarians, when World War II came, they were scrutinized as possible being spy for the Nazi regime. Well, they found out, no, that was not it. I mean, they were not Nazis uh, or you know,
Spies.
they did not adhere
Hmm.
to Hitler's what he was doing. As a matter of fact, my grandfather we had a naval base, and at that naval base, it was an air base, they were training pilots, but they also had prisoner of war, German prisoners of war, and my grandfather worked there, and his main job was to interpret what the Germans were saying and what they needed.
And where was this at?
And this was in DeLand,
Okay.
at the air base. And what's really amazing, though, is that he was so popular, and over the years, when these POWs were released, and sent back to Germany, he still maintained contact with several of them. And it was just like, we move, and we write, talk, about how you doing, how's the family, and everything else. They maintained that. I was very proud of my uncle,
Grandfather.
and
So how long did Grandpa Larworth live?
my grandfather died when he was 99 years old.
And Grandma Larworth?
My grandmother was 93. When my grandfather died, my grandmother, they'd been married 65 years, I believe it was. And my grandmother there was nobody to take care of her at the time, so they were going to put her in well, what they call now assisted care home. But my grandmother says she's not going to do there. She was there for 2 days, and then she died.
They were good people.
Yeah.
All right, is there anything else you want to add about being a second, would you be a second generation American, Hungarian American?
Yeah, I would be a second generation Hungarian American. Although they did speak Hungarian sometimes when they didn't want us to know something,
Mm-hmm.
but they never taught us the language. I had asked one time, and they said, no, you just learn American. It was very difficult being a Hungarian American, especially for my mother. She was called names and made fun of. And but she,
Yeah, I'm sure. All right, Dad, I want to thank you for doing this interview.
I glad to do it. If there's any other questions, I can pull them up in my mind and discuss a lot of things. It was always good. It was always a pleasure to go over there.
Right.
The only one thing I remember about my grandfather, and I got angry one day and slammed the door. My grandfather got me, put me over his knees and spanked me, and to this day, I still remember.
Well, if people a little bit different nowadays, so. All right, thank you.